Welcome to the FinCom meeting of January 16th, 2025. This is our first meeting of 2025, so I'd like to wish everyone a very happy new year. It's good to be back, and I hope everybody had a nice holiday. As chair of the committee, I recognize that we have a quorum, and I call this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is to accept the minutes of November 7th and November 18th. I hope everybody had a chance to review the meeting minutes that were posted on the Google Drive. If so, may I get a motion to approve both of them?
So moved. Second.
All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. The motion passes. We shall now move to the town manager's report. We will start with some reserve fund transfer stuff that we're going to work on today.
Good evening, committee members. We do have several reserve fund transfers that we're requesting this evening for the FY25 budget. The first is a $15,000 increase to the building inspector fee account. And this is the result of a bid process that we went through for assistant inspector for plumbing and gas services. So we do this through a contract. And we've known historically that we've been kind of underfunding this and getting a good deal through a local contractor. And as everyone has cost pressures, when we went out to bid again for this 3-year cycle, we've seen a bigger increase, certainly than we have funding for in the budget. So again, we have about $10,000 in this budget line item, and we need $15,000 additional dollars to cover the cost of services that we need. This position supports the plumbing, gas, and fire inspection services that are performed through the building inspector's office and fire department.
Does anybody from the committee have a comment or question? Dennis?
So, did it go up by almost more than double the fee?
It did, yes. Yep. Yeah.
And
so
what do we take in for fees collected for the inspections?
I don't know if we can pull that up.
Okay.
We could definitely have run those numbers, but I don't have them on hand at this time.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
But if I had to guess, it's much more than
Yeah.
the 25,000.
Yeah, I was just curious, but,
Yeah.
I mean, and how many bidders were there?
We had reached out to 3 applicants and received 2 replies.
Okay.
Was it the same person as before who won the bid? Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
That was the question I had.
So,
Yep.
I'm sorry, so the fees we collect, does that go into this fund, or does it go into the general fund, then we go out?
The latter. So
Okay.
it comes in as a local receipt.
Okay.
So I can share what
Please.
we've received. So for gas permits, we've collected $35,000 to date. And for plumbing, $27,000 to date.
So it pays for itself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gene?
Is that a 3-year contract?
It is.
Yes.
Any other questions on gas and plumbing?
Maybe just one clarification. Is that in line with the market?
I think so. We knew the last 3-year deal that we had was probably the last time we were going to have it at just $10,000 a year. So
Thank you.
Okay, if not, may I get a motion to approve this particular transfer?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. The motion passes. We'll move on to the assessor's separate appropriations account.
So this is a request for $35,000 to augment the assessor's budget. These funds are used for contracted services associated with in-field appraisal and assessment work. The reason that this wasn't included in the budget is that fiscal year 26 is the start of a recertification year for the town with the Department of Revenue. However, given the scope of work that the Department of Revenue is asking us to take on, when we laid it out, we determined that we needed to get started much before as soon as possible. rather than waiting to the start of the fiscal year. So we have a lot of pre-work to do before the Department of Revenue comes in. So these funds will enable us to hire the contractor and ensure that we meet our statutory deadlines with the Department of Revenue for that recertification year.
Milind?
So just curious question, Kevin. So, will this contractor be, once we identify, start now or
Yes.
wait for the, okay.
They'll be in place.
And then second question, if I may ask, again curious, is how frequently do we do this certification?
It's every 5
5
years,
years.
5 years with the state. Yep, every 5 years.
Thanks.
Any further questions or comments?
What was the total again?
The totaling request is $35,000.
Thank you.
One follow-up on that. So is that 35 itself, or do we already allocated some amount to that?
It's 35,000.
Flat.
And that will cover 2 years.
Okay.
If there are no further questions, may I get, yes, David, please.
So that covers 2 years, but once we get recertified, it's good for 5 years. Is this, so it seems like it's a burst, and then we don't do it for a few years in a burst.
Correct.
Okay, so once this is done, we don't see it for,
That's correct.
perfect, thank you.
And this will be appropriated to a 9 account, I believe, so that the expenditures that remain from this year will roll over to next year's as well.
There are no further questions. May I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. The motion passes. We shall now move to the reserve fund transfer for the town clerk overtime.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would like to talk about Minuet 3 through Minuet 7 on the agenda, the town clerk overtime, professional services, salary and wages temporary account, as well as town council and the operating support in total, and I'll detail them out individually as well.
Yeah, that
So
makes sense.
these 5 items are associated with the special election that has been called for through the referendum process regarding Article 9 from the November 18th special town meeting. As you all know, that election will occur on February 4th. So in total, these 5 items total $52,352. And they represent the cost associated with running that special election. And I'll go through them. $600 in the town clerk's office estimated overtime. $16,389 for election workers and police detail time the day of the election. $9,063 for the development, printing of the ballot, as well as the coding of the election machines, the voting machines, and the rental fee for the private facility that we use for one of the polling places at SAC Park. $11,300 for town council legal advice in preparing for this election, and $15,000 for the printing and distribution of the required voter guide explaining the outcome of a yes vote and a no vote, and summarizing, which will be mailed to all registered voters in the community. So again, $52,352 associated with this election. Town council's total hours are estimated. The overtime is estimated, and the election hours are estimated, but they are based upon the November election. So we think they're good numbers. These numbers don't fluctuate no matter how many voters turn out, because they're the workers that are there and the time that's dedicated to it. So those are estimates, but we of course didn't prepare to have an election. Since it hits so many different line items, we feel it's necessary to request these funds to make sure that these accounts don't go into deficit in the middle of the year.
Ryan?
Curious how many ballots are printed for this?
I don't know the specific number. We have almost 27,000 registered voters. We won't like, we won't print 27,000, but I would say that we can't run out on election day.
Okay.
So we'll print well over 50%.
Thank you.
Do we rent the counting machines, or does that?
No,
come-
but they need coded and certified in advance of every election and submitted to the Secretary of State.
Okay.
So that's what those fees are. We own them, but the company that manages them for us has to come in and do that.
Mr.
Dennis?
What was the thought process about having the not just pushing it off into the May election?
So that decision was made by the select board, but I can try to summarize. One aspect of consideration is gaining compliance because of the grant impacts. I can tell you, just yesterday, we received a letter from the fire marshal telling us that we will not be receiving a $25,000 grant that we're eligible for, that we use to purchase firefighter turnout gear because we're not compliant with MBTA communities. We intend to apply like we do every year for community one-stop grants, including Mass Works grants. That application period starts in April. So we want to know our compliance in advance of that. And we also just want to expeditiously review the action of town meeting and bring closure to this matter. We now know that we have until July 14th for compliance through the emergency regulations that the governor issued yesterday. But we weren't afforded that knowledge back in December when the select board called for it. So,
Follow-up?
yeah, sure.
Since compliance has been extended, is there any way to go back for that firefighter equipment?
Our hope.
We are
yeah.
technically in compliance now.
Well, we're not in compliance. Well, we haven't gotten to the deadline. There's at least one interim step that we have to take, which is submitting an action plan to the state to gain interim compliance. Our hope is that everything's really clear on February 5th as to where we stand. But if nothing else, we'll be submitting that action plan, which should put us in interim compliance
Okay.
and able to receive that grant.
Gene?
I have one quick follow-up. You've just spent $103,000. What does this do to our budget now as far as reserve fund transfers go?
So if all of these reserve fund transfers are approved tonight, the reserve fund balance will be $166,648.
You think that's gonna be enough to carry us?
I mean, this is a little heavier than we get into at the midpoint of most years, but I think that we should be fine because we made some transfers in the fire budget and other budgets just back at the November town meeting, so I think those are much more stable. We didn't even have to do a reserve fund transfer for the fire department, which has traditionally been one of the biggest ones that we had to do. If something else comes up that's unforeseen, we do have the opportunity to work with the finance committee and make interdepartmental transfers within the last 30 days of the fiscal year. That's something that we've never even really talked about or considered, but it is allowable under the general laws. So if we really ran into something that we didn't expect, we could have that opportunity. We can also still move some things around at the annual town meeting if we have to.
Thank you.
Rajesh?
Couple questions, just for clarification. So the council's costs associated, is that exclusively related to the special election? Or it
100%.
includes also others?
It is related to the analysis of the referendum process and the preparation for the special election through that.
So generally our elections go from like full day, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or something.
Mhm.
But so for this special election, we are only doing it for 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Right?
Correct.
So these estimates are based on that.
Though the hours that we'll have to staff it, but the number that we've used at the most recent elections as far as staff members.
So you mentioned this is an estimate. So are we expecting it to rise or?
If it's higher than this, we feel we'll be able to cover it. This is our best estimate, and I don't think we'd need additional funding from the reserve fund.
Thank you.
Any further questions? If not, may I get a motion to approve these 5 items related to reserve fund transfers for the special election?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say nay. The motion passes. We shall now move on to item 3B, which is a review of the fiscal year 26 revenue manual.
Good evening, committee. I'm looking forward to going through the FY26 revenue manual with you at this time. We'll be going over the data that was available at the end of the calendar year, and this will be further updated with the release of fiscal projection 1 in February. So we're going to start with a review of the main revenue categories for FY26. The town of Shrewsbury's fiscal capacity is derived from its ability to levy taxes on property and charge for certain fees for service. The revenue manual that we're going to go through has been developed to provide a comprehensive reference for the town's various revenue sources and inform the budgeting process for FY26. The complete FY26 manual has been published online, and copies can also be provided for the public's upon request. So now moving on to the summary, the total revenue is projected at this time at $188,589,196, which is approximately a decrease of 1.1 million or 0.63% less than FY25 special town meeting. Next slide, Alex. All right. So here, the property tax levy, in accordance with the provisions of Proposition 2.5, will increase to $115,125,698, which is 3.1 million or 2.84% greater than FY25. This includes a base 2.5% increase over 25, and the property tax revenues dedicated to debt service, which have been excluded from the provisions of Prop 2.5, will provide approximately 8.6 million, which is 637,075 less than FY25. State aid estimates are made up of 3 main components: cherry sheet aid, which is the annual recurring aid for education, general government, and other categories; tax exemption aid, and highway construction, preservation, and improvement through the Chapter 90 formula. The state aid is projected at $27,227,643, which is approximately 1% increase over FY25. As we see each year, this figure will be updated with the issuance of each fiscal projection if there is updates from the governor's state budget for that time. The town's utility operations, solid waste, water and sewer, and stormwater are projected to raise $21,816,944 in revenue during FY26. This is approximately a decrease of 2.6 million or 5.1% in comparison to FY25. Additional funds may be identified from other funds in the Treasury to fund further ongoing capital and maintenance projects for these operations as the budget process matures. And one of the reasons that there is a decrease is we were able to close out some warrant articles on old projects, and we were able to use that as revenue projects. So it's not always the case that we have additional revenue from projects to close out. Local receipt revenues are forecasted to yield 16.5 million, which is an increase of 920,000 or 6.45% over FY25 budgeted revenue. Local receipts is the revenue category most exposed to general economic conditions, and projections will regularly be updated throughout the budget process. Free cash funds are appropriated in accordance with the town's reserve fund policy, and the current projected appropriation from free cash is 2.7 million for FY26 based on the currently anticipated warrant articles. The remaining other available funds include revenues related to the sale of cemetery lots, cemetery trust, debt service revenue from Selco, internal account transfers that we're estimating, bond interest reserve, cable public access funds, anticipated community preservation committee revenues, and this Selco revenue used to further reduce the tax rate. All these together are projected to raise $5,205,911 in FY26. The override stabilization is the centerpiece of the commitment of the Select Board and the School Committee in prolonging the duration of the funds raised from the approved override ballot in May 2021. These funds are reserved for future appropriation by town meeting to fund the operations of municipal and educational departments, as well as shared operating support expenses. Since FY22, the town has consistently deposited funds into the override stabilization at least once annually, and the current balance as of the end of November was $9,470,465. At this point in time, there is no planned use of the override stabilization fund within FY26. Next slide, Alex. All right. Now we're going to take a look at property tax. This is the primary source of revenue for virtually all Massachusetts municipalities. In Shrewsbury, property taxes represent approximately 60% of our annual revenues. Property taxes are levied on real property, land and buildings, and personal property or equipment. State law mandates that communities update their property values at least every 5 years and obtain state certification that such values represent full and fair cash value. A reevaluation was conducted in FY21, and in interim years, the town reviews and adjusts values to ensure they represent current market conditions. And as we've discussed earlier, we will be coming up on the next reevaluation in FY26. Property values and new growth for FY26 are preliminary estimates used to project the levy limit. The FY25 levy limit was $102,675,615, and the 2.5% increase allowed for FY26 is $2,566,890. New growth from construction not previously on the tax rolls is expected to add approximately $1.25 million to the levy. This estimate is supported by both the 3, 5-year, and 10-year averages of tax levy growth. An additional $8,633,193 is added to the tax levy to cover the costs of debt service for projects approved by the voters as Proposition 2.5 debt overrides or exclusions. The added debt exclusion amount is net of other available sources dedicated to debt service, is estimated at $48,056. And finally, the projection for FY26 tax levy is, again, $115,125,698, which is an increase of $3.1 million over FY25. One final note, these figures do not reflect an improved debt exclusion of $15.4 million for the DPW/Town Hall Facilities Project. If this project is voted at a special town meeting in 2025, it would be added to a ballot question in May in 2025 election, and there would be approximately $696,000 in additional excluded debt. All right, your turn, Alex.
So the second largest revenue category behind the tax levy is state aid. State aid is the restricted and unrestricted aid municipalities receive through the state budget. As Mr. Stonen mentioned, the state budget is usually released sometime in January, so prior to the release, we've applied a conservative 1% increase to most categories where applicable. State aid is broken out into the following categories. General government aid is a direct local aid and additional assistance that consists of unrestricted general government aid, veterans benefits, of which the town receives a 75% reimbursement rate, and pilot payments for state-owned land not subject to local property taxes. The FY26 budget is estimated at $3,681,715 for general government aid. Next is Chapter 90. These funds are allocated for roadway capital improvements, such as highway construction, preservation, and improvement projects. Total program dollars are divided among communities based on lane miles, population, and employment. In FY '25, a new appropriation was incorporated into Chapter 90, known as the Fair Share Amendment. These funds must be spent on public education and transportation, and the apportionment is automatically incorporated into the town's existing Chapter 90 contract with Mass DOT. An increase based on the state's anticipated funding has been estimated at $1,619,465. The next category is school aid, which is direct aid for schools based on the number of pupils enrolled. Each district is guaranteed to receive at least $30 per pupil in Chapter 70 aid. School aid also includes charter school tuition reimbursements for the costs associated with pupils attending charter schools. And we've held school aid level funded with FY '25. The next category is tax exemptions, of which we have several categories of property tax exemptions that we receive a partial reimbursement for. This includes veterans exemptions, blind persons, surviving spouses, and elderly who meet the exemption requirements. At this time, we're holding tax exemptions level funded with FY '25. The last state aid category, cherry sheet offsets, are typically grant funds for school choice tuition and the library. These are reserved for direct expenditures by those departments and cannot be used for generally available revenue. Cherry sheet offsets have been level funded with FY '25. In total, state aid revenue is forecasted at $27,227,643, which again is a conservative 1% increase. These figures will be further reviewed and revised as the state budget is developed.
The town's utility revenue consists of funds generated through water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste enterprise fees. The water rates are reviewed regularly by the water commissioners or the select board to ensure that the fees generated accurately support the cost to supply clean drinking water to the community. Likewise, sewer and stormwater rates are reviewed regularly by the sewer commissioners to ensure that the fees generated accurately support the costs of their respective enterprises. Lastly, the pricing of both the pay-as-you-throw bags and bulk waste stickers may be adjusted to ensure the receipts received by the solid waste enterprise offsets approximately 50% of the enterprise costs, with the remaining coming through the tax levy. If we start at the top here and work our way down, the FY '26 solid waste enterprise revenue forecast assumes similar revenue projections as the preceding years since the pay-as-you-throw bag fee went into effect in July 2021. And at this point in time, if there are no rate increases, revenues are projected to remain level. Now moving again down to sewer. Recently, necessary infrastructure projects have drawn heavily on a sewer surplus account. FY '26 sewer revenue projections were tabulated from the figures provided in the sewer commissioner's April 5th, 2024 memo, in accordance with the sewer rate analysis that was approved by the sewer commissioners March 15th, 2021. The MS4 2016 permit is an unfunded federal mandate that requires operators of an MS4s to significantly bolster and provide additional services to their stormwater management program. In February 2019, the Board of Sewer Commissioners approved the Stormwater Management Rules and Regulations. And these rules and regulations for the stormwater utility rates for properties within the town of Shrewsbury and the stormwater management permit on any land disturbing actively equal or more than 5,000 square feet. The town has estimated an average cost to comply with the MS4 permit to be $1.75 million per year for the first 5 years. As an element of the MS4 2016 permit provisions, the town must develop and implement a lake phosphorus control plan, or LPCP. The LPCP implementation includes structural and non-structural best management practices executed through programs, projects, and policies. This LPCP must be fully implemented by June 30th, 2033. The total cost associated with this is estimated to range between 20 to 34 million. Now we'll move down to water. The water revenue projections were tabulated from the figures in the approved water rate analysis of April 25th, 2023. The study was conducted at the outset of setting the FY24 water rate schedule and includes the following projected water revenues: Water Conservation Fund, water article closeouts, water system improvement / retained earnings, and then water rate revenue. One other final note, these figures do not reflect the utility self-supporting portions of the DPW / town hall facilities project at this time. If the project is voted, as we mentioned earlier, at the special town meeting in 2025 and added to the ballot in May of 25, and it passes across water, sewer, stormwater, and solid waste, approximately 1.4 million will be due in debt and interest for that project.
David?
I'm sorry, can I ask a question
Yeah.
now, or do you want me to wait till the end? So, as I look at this, we have the actual for 22, but budgeted in 23, 24, 25.
Yeah.
Can we get the actuals for that next time?
Of course.
Because when we see budgeted, it's kind of the same across the board, but what did we actually
Yep.
get?
We can definitely do that, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a question? How do we make out on the new rubbish bags? Are we gonna change?
We did change effective July 1st as far as manufacturing goes.
They're
And
not out on the market yet.
they are.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. We have received a market decrease in complaints since that time.
Oh.
So we are producing thicker bags.
One other follow-up on the stormwater revenue. With all the construction and stuff going on, that seems to be a very small increase in the fees.
With all the construction that's going on,
In
increase.
town, yeah.
Let me just. Oh, I see. So, if you look at the previous year as well, in FY '25 budgeted amount, you can see that there was 2.6 used from the retained earnings. That supplemented a lot of the construction you're probably seeing at this point in time. And that was the intent of the stormwater rates when they were initially designed, was to raise additional revenue in the beginning to help take care of these larger projects as we move forward. Does that sort of help?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess one follow-up on it. How do we stand right now as far as compliance goes?
I can get a more detailed answer for you on that for the next meeting, or drop that.
No, I
in.
know,
Yeah.
we had like a 5-year plan laid
Yes.
out, and we were into the retention ponds, we were
Mhm.
into the engineering aspects of it, and there were timetables, I think,
Yep.
on there. I just wondered how that stood.
And that was part of the LPCPA or that I was mentioning earlier. So the next step is we've identified these bodies of water that have certain phosphorus levels, and now we need to develop a plan in which we can remove or mitigate some of the phosphorus, and also develop plans to prevent leaves, for example, in entering the detention basins and ponds as well going forward. So the first 5 years were the assessment, and then it's developing a plan that we will implement going forward. We are on pace to meet those requirements.
Thank you.
All right, Cable Public Access Fund. On May 16th, 2018, the Public Education Governmental Access Programming and Services Agreement was signed between the town of Shrewsbury and the nonprofit Shrewsbury Media Connection for the purposes of the provision of PEG access programming, PEG access services, facilities, training, and equipment. The revenue for this fund is comprised from the franchise fees collected for the use of the town's cable television, public education, and governmental access. As per the 2024 agreement, the town shall provide a percentage of the gross annual revenue from cable operations to provide the PEG program. The funds for these payments are recovered through revenue collected via the contract terms of the town's cable television franchise license granted to Selco. At this point in time, the projection for FY '26 cable public access fund revenue is $388,836. And it is our understanding that there will be the final audit for the calendar year available in February, so we'll actually have the true final number at that point in time from Selco.
Question.
Yes.
So does that include fees from streaming as well? From streaming service and the in the fiber?
They are, yep. They are honoring that even though they don't have to.
Okay. Are they doing anything about the streaming service? Because a lot of people are having issues with it. Hasn't been that bad for me, but it feels like a lot of people are going to drop Cellco streaming and move to, Fubo, whatever the different ones are out there.
Yeah, Cellco continues to work on two fronts on the streaming. The company that both provides the app and then the television services itself to make improvements. It's interesting just to learn and observe, although frustrating for customers, how interconnected the internet is, especially because the streaming service that we use is not located on the East Coast. And whenever there's been major internet outages, whether it was due from Hurricane Helene or a major line that was hit somewhere in Ohio, it significantly reduced the capacity of internet service that we're providing through the fiber system and our streaming services specifically. So that's kind of separate and apart, but they don't feel that they have the best product right now, and they are working to make improvements to it.
When are they also looking at finding another product?
Yes, yep.
Thank you.
Follow up to that.
Right.
For that reason, should we anticipate a continued decline in the revenue that might be generated from this?
That's a good question. Before we get to fiscal projection 1, we can double check this number with Cellco. It was developed with them, based upon subscribers, et cetera. But we can double check it before we finalize the first budget.
Yep.
Just to piggyback that, Kevin, have they seen a decrease since fiber went live? And when you look back to 25, and here we are in 26, have they seen a decrease in customers
Yeah,
dropping the system?
definitely. Yep.
To Dennis's point?
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
I don't know if that, sorry, I don't think fiber is everywhere in the community yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
Do they have a plan when they're going to? I thought it was supposed to be completed already by now.
It
Even
was
by
supposed to
last
have
year.
been, but it's within the next 18 months or so. They'll be through the rest of the community. They did run into supply chain issues within the last 2 years prior, but
Okay.
All right, so the next category is local receipts. This committee is pretty familiar. We talk about this category a lot. These are locally generated revenues other than real and personal property. And this revenue category is usually the most elastic and dependent on economic conditions. We use historical trend analysis and an emphasis on focusing on prior year actuals to determine these projections. So over the past 5 years, the average difference between local receipts budgeted and actual has been calculated at 23.33% with an average value of $2,784,403. On average, over the past 5 years, we have increased budgeted local receipts approximately 3.06% annually. So taking a conservative approach has put the town in a really favorable position to continue to generate free cash and surplus revenue. However, in FY26, we feel confident in proposing a 5.91% increase over FY25 budgeted revenues. This increase reflects those historical trends and the generally strong economic conditions without compromising the conservative approach that we've taken to forecasting. So looking at these categories individually from the top down, motor vehicle excise is a locally imposed tax assessed to owners of motor vehicles registered to an address within town. The excise rate is set by state statute at $35 per 1,000 of vehicle value, and motor vehicle excise has shown a healthy increase over the past couple of years, rebounding well from market conditions during the pandemic. For FY26, we're proposing a budget of $7,560,000, which is an increase of 3.85% over FY25. The other excise tax category is comprised of hotel, meals, and cannabis excise tax. Starting with hotel, Shrewsbury historically has seen a positive growth rate in hotel excise. However, given the current migrant housing situation facing the state, we are not anticipating the town will receive significant hotel excise revenue in FY '26. The majority of revenue from this category is anticipated to come from the approximately 30 registered short-term rentals in town, since the properties known as the Days Inn and the Worcester City Motel are no longer operating as public lodging facilities. The FY '26 budgeted revenue amount for hotel excise is $100,000. Meals tax is anticipated to remain steady based on historical averages, and in FY '26 we propose a budget of $775,000, which is an increase of approximately 8% and aligns with historical actuals. This is another revenue category that has rebounded strongly from the impacts of the pandemic. The last category in other excise is cannabis excise, and this revenue category was first introduced in FY '22. This is a local sales tax on the retail sales of marijuana or marijuana products at a rate of 3%. Revenue is now significant enough from these sources to be broken out into a separate category. However, given the limited trend analysis data we have, the FY '26 budgeted revenue amount has been held level with FY '25 at $215,000. The next category is landfill revenue. This is the annual fee collected for materials deposited into the landfill by Wheelabrator and also for metals recovery activities. In May 2024, the Montefiore began receiving additional residue quantities from the Saugus waste to energy plant, and it's expected that 50% of Saugus's ash will be delivered to the Shrewsbury landfill in FY '25, and that will increase to 100% in FY '28. It's anticipated that this will provide excess revenue to the town, and so the FY '26 budget, we're estimating $1.9 million, or an increase of 8.5%. The next revenue category is departmental fees, and this revenue category consists of fees collected by various town departments, including the town clerk's office, the town manager's office, the police department, the fire department, the cemetery division, and the FY '26 budget proposes a very minor increase over FY '25. The next category is license and permits, and these consist primarily of fees charged for activities that are regulated through the town of Shrewsbury bylaws. This includes the sale of alcoholic beverage and restaurant licenses, building, gas, electrical, and plumbing permits, which building permits make up most of this revenue category, and we're estimating a budget of $1.5 million, which is an increase of about 11% over FY '25. The next revenue category, interest, income, and penalties, is made up of investment income and penalties associated with delinquent tax payments. Historically, this category has varied very widely due to the dramatic fluctuations in interest rates and the amount of funds that we have on hand for investment. We monitor this category very closely and work with the town's financial investment firm, Bartholomew & Co., to monitor the town's investments. This category has performed well historically over the past couple years, as you know. However, we've applied a conservative increase over FY '25, and this is primarily due to the anticipation that the majority of the town's balance of ARPA funds, which we had $11.5 million of, will be fully expended in FY '26. The FY '26 budget estimate is $2,850,000, which is an increase of 1.7%. The next category, which you'll see is a zero, is rental income. This revenue category is very minimal and is not factored into revenue forecasts. However, as you can see through actuals, we do receive a pretty minimal amount in this category.
Could I ask a question? Going back, my memory, 22 and 23, what were those rentals?
So that is the Edgemere Mobile Home Park. We're eligible to receive $12 per unit that is rented, not vacant.
But we still have the Edgemere Park?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
doesn't, but we don't generate any rental?
We are, I believe in FY '24, it shouldn't be zero, but some of that revenue hit the books in '25. So we are currently receiving that revenue. We receive it monthly.
One additional follow-up, how about the school rentals? Why doesn't that come to the town when they're doing rentals on the weekends?
It's retained by, It's retained by the school department, yeah. I don't have the answer to the why, but
Yeah.
that
Well,
is,
I mean, we must provide lights
of
and
course,
gen,
yeah. They do
janitor
make an
services
transfer,
and-
right?
There is,
Don't they make an electricity transfer?
they do make
at
an
the end?
electric, yeah, about $50,000 a year for running those facilities for additional hours, yeah. They cover the utilities.
so the rentals does cover,
Yeah, so they just do it in a one-time journal entry transfer through accounting rather than providing us with the revenue.
so we still have the colleges using it on the weekends,
We have a variety of outside users.
including
Some
the
of us-
gym.
Yeah,
and-
correct,
Yep.
yeah.
So Alex, I had a couple of questions on
Yep.
some of these categories. One was the landfill. If memory serves me correctly, we're gonna run out of that very soon, in a few years. So that would be a severe depreciation in our local receipts once that happens,
Yep.
close to $2 million.
Yeah, so 2031 is the timeline that we're aware of at this point, with regards to the current permanent capacity for it. We have loosely connected the amount of money that comes in from the landfill revenue to the other post-employment benefits contribution that we're making. Now, obviously, that is something that we want to continue to make, but it's not a mandatory, expenditure that we have to make. So we loosely tie those together through the policies that the select board set, but we're moving into that final window of time, and it is something that we do need to pay attention, over the next 2 or 3 fiscal cycles.
Sure.
Well, what is the plan to use of that property after we cap it? Could it be used for a park? Could it be used for a revenue-generating set of fields or something?
I don't know the answer to that, but we can certainly, so our agreement is that it will be maintained by Win Waste Energy in perpetuity since they deposited the materials there.
Okay.
Whether the topography of the site allows for any additional use, I'm not sure, like those uses that
even
you've
solar.
determined, but yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. Perhaps additional solar, just like is on the closed section to the east right
So
now.
we are thinking about how we might be able to generate revenue
Mm-hmm,
in the future.
yeah.
Rajesh?
A couple of questions related to the hotel taxes. So does the state providing any compensation for the lost revenue from the hotels and associated?
Yeah, so we, go ahead.
Yeah, so they did in FY '24, and I believe that they've
Just
extended
did,
that into FY '25.
So we're expecting to get the money from the state for that?
This year, yes.
Yeah, the one change is though, is that the Days Inn is closed and it's being the shelter's being operated out of the Worcester City, so there's just a lot fewer rooms that are there. The Days Inn is being renovated, so hopefully that comes back online as a public lodging facility in the near future, and we would be able to increase it. But the state just issued the determination that they are gonna continue to pay excise tax within the last week or so for this fiscal year. So up until this point, we didn't know whether they were going to or not.
Okay, thank you. One other quick question related to the income and on interest income, where with the assets that Bartholomew is managing. So we did last time some provision that they can manage it more or diversify much more better than what they're doing. So does it enables more income coming in? Do we expect that?
Not this bucket of funds. That was just the trust funds.
Okay.
So those are segregated from what's called the operating account, which provides this revenue source.
So on the cannabis sales, when they first came about, we were guaranteed a certain amount per year, and it seems that's gone away, right? It was after 3 years, I think. But it seems like that's fairly flat. I think, what is it, like just over 200,000 this year we're projecting? If it's 700,000, 100,000 is about 200,000 for the cannabis sales?
So there's two different components to the cannabis.
Right.
There's the host community fee and there's the excise, both were 3%. So we will continue to receive the 3% from the cannabis excise, but we're no longer receiving the host community. But we haven't planned for host community
Yeah.
in the last two fiscal cycles,
Correct.
so.
And that second aspect, the additional, that falls into the last category, remaining revenue. I can wrap that up real quickly if there are further more questions. So that's the last category. This includes various fees and reimbursements, including a pilot payment from the Shrewsbury Housing Authority. It also includes miscellaneous recurring supplemental real estate tax, which is a supplemental tax assessment on new construction. It includes reimbursements for the cost of transportation for non-resident pupils and the annual license fee paid to the town by Selco for the use of the solar array. In regards to the cannabis community impact fee that historically had flowed through this category, new host community agreements have been executed with both establishments in accordance with Mass General Law, and we will no longer include the additional 3% impact fee. So in this line, we're anticipating $500,000.
But is the other fee that we have been collecting been decreasing? Because you're saying it's about 200,000 for all the shops, but in the beginning, they were talking about that for one shop. That was the projections, but we have multiple shops and we're still taking in the same amount of money.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
So in fiscal year ~24, we collected $197,000 in the other excise cannabis line. In '23, 220,000. In '22, 305,000. And in '21, 180,000, which that may have
It's
been
the first year.
Yeah.
So between 22 and 26, there hasn't been an increase in profit in the marijuana industry.
No, it's the saturation of it's the saturation of the facilities.
No,
There's more of them, yep.
The idea back then was it was gonna increasingly give us more of
Sure.
our money, it just hasn't.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
correct, yep.
All right, thank you.
A couple of questions that I had. Second, Jim.
Yeah, no worries.
The licenses and permits, we had seen a bump during the pandemic time, and it seems to have held, and it seems that the projection is going up a little bit from the previous year. So is that, is it safe to say that it wasn't really COVID-related, but it's a pattern that the town is observing that's continuing? It may have been initiated by COVID, but we're still seeing it.
Right now, yeah, definitely. Our confidence remains due to, proposed developments that, haven't started the permitting process with the building inspector. A major project like the UPS, which did just pull permits, is, over $300,000 in permits just for that one project. So we seem to be landing one major commercial and residential project within each fiscal year, and that seems to be continuing on the horizon, at least from what we can see. So it does seem to be a new normal.
Second question I had, and I'm sorry, I'm segueing back to state aid. I was hearing on NPR just yesterday that you do a surplus in the fair share tax, the millionaire tax. They're going to revisit Chapter 90 funding for every town, so there is potential for us to get more monies in that particular bracket. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And do we have to advocate it at a political level, or is it just a formula that,
No, it's just a formula.
I see?
And it's based on public lane miles of roadway.
So are we in potential to receive a big bump? I know we can't put a number at this point, but
Yeah.
is there any confidence about what potentially could happen?
I haven't heard any specifics related to that increase. We are anticipating more local or Chapter 90 revenue for fiscal year 26. But we'll see if they make a mid-year adjustment this year.
Jim, you had a question?
Yeah, Alex, just if we go back to landfill for a second. Who's the agreement we have that are depositing ash, you said earlier?
Saugus,
Saugus. And can you remind me, how long have they been doing that?
this is the second year.
The second year. And that you said they're gonna incrementally go from X percent to 100%?
50% this current year, and it will go up to 100% starting in FY '28.
I'm just curious, I don't know if it's a fair question, with that 2031 window, and we're taking on someone else's ash, not only are we gonna decrease that delta when that closes, lose that revenue when we can't deposit our stuff, but then have to pay to go elsewhere. I'm just curious if you could comment on the strategy on why we would,
So
I can see the short-term revenue, but maybe the long-term issues that may create for us.
So we have a landfill use and operations agreement with Wind Waste Energy, and they determine what comes into the facility. So they're owning and operating it. The ash that we receive is derived from waste to energy plants that they also own. And so that waste to energy plant in Saugus is no longer able to be deposited in a monofill in Saugus, so they're bringing it here. So we don't really, it is not you could say that the life of the landfill would extend beyond 2031. We can get the percentages of how much of the annualized amount of ash that comes in there is Saugus versus Millbury and some of the others. But it's not, this isn't just Shrewsbury ash, it's anything that gets burned at several incinerators, one in, I believe, in New York, Connecticut, and then Millbury. New Hampshire, not New York, New Hampshire. So we don't really control it, I guess is
That's helpful.
the
Thank
short
you.
answer. Yep.
Just a quick follow-up. Do we negotiate that, Kevin, or do we have a seat at the table with that?
Yes, our current agreement for landfill operations runs through 2027, so it's actually on the horizon. There may be an article to bring in a consultant to help us. One of the most challenging parts is valuing cubic yards of airspace for ash deposit. So, but yes, it's through 2027.
That's helpful, thank you.
Sure.
Gene?
One quick follow-up on that. When we get into that negotiation, are we gonna have to do that conservation review again and everything?
As far as environmental permitting,
Yeah.
so they do all that, and I mean, we get constant reports between them and DEP for the operation and permitting and where they're depositing the landfill. So I'm not exactly sure. I can ask if there's anything cyclical in that, but I don't know that our operations agreement ties into their DEP permits or not, but we can look into that.
If, at one time, a couple of years ago, we were infringing on one of the brooks.
Right.
Down in the back there, and it was carrying it
Mm-hmm.
all the way to Grafton.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we know since that time that they've made a lot of changes and done a better job of capturing any of the water that goes into the area, into the sewer system, because when we have a lot of rain, it surges the system there. So any water that goes into an open part of an open cell gets captured and then goes into the sewer system. It doesn't discharge. So any water that's being discharged as groundwater is not making its way to the ash itself.
So this next slide is just a good visual on, as I mentioned, how well our actuals have performed over the last few years, and you can see the gap between budget and actual has definitely grown.
Why do you think that is?
Generally, good economic conditions.
No, but I mean, why are the estimates getting further from the actual?
So we've been very conservative in our year-over-year increase. As I mentioned, I think on average we would increase budgeted amounts by 3% each year, and they've averaged 22% over that. So we're confident in bumping that 3% up to 6% this year.
If I can just supplement that, I mean, definitely, as Alex said, the level of growth or the pace of growth has been unprecedented. Even if you just look at motor vehicle excise from FY22 to, FY24 actuals is $1.6 million. And that's a massive increase. And so inflation and cost of goods where there's taxation on it has definitely brought in more revenue. The other interesting part of this, I think, is because we have the expenditure side limitations due to the override model, we don't get pressured to hit the highest number on local receipts because we're limiting the amount of expenditures. So it is actually provided us an opportunity to set the local receipts at the amount that we need at those spending caps, and then have the benefit of it at free cash for capital investments and other stabilization investments.
All right. Free cash, which is certified as of July 1st each year by the Commonwealth's Department of Revenue, represents the portion of the general fund surplus revenue that is unrestricted and available for appropriation. These funds, once certified, may be used to support supplemental appropriations during the year, to support the ensuing fiscal year's budget, to reduce the tax levy, or to serve as emergency reserves. Free cash is generated when the actual operating results compare favorably with the budget, such as when actual revenues exceed the original estimates, and/or when actual expenditures are less than the amounts that were appropriated. Free cash is also affected by increases or decreases in uncollected property taxes, deficits in non-general funds, and any other legally incurred operating deficits such as snow removal overdrafts. The DOR recommends that the towns maintain a free cash balance equal to no less than 5% of their fiscal year operating budget. And the Select Board adopted a fiscal policy endeavoring to generate free cash equivalent to 3 to 5% of the annual general fund budget, while amounts in excess of 2.5% of the proposed operating budget will be available for capital or other one-time expenses. It should be noted that over the past decade, the average free cash balance as a percentage of the prior year operating budget has been 5.91%. The town's free cash balance as of June 30th, 2024 was $12,504,686. In accordance with the town's policy, it's recommended that $2.7 million of the existing balance be appropriated towards the FY26 budget as follows. $35,000 for the Lake Quinsigamond Commission, $300,000 to maintain the general stabilization balance at policy level, $350,000 for counseling and educational services through SYFS, $20,000 to continue to fund the insurance trust, and $8,000 to fund the medical expenses for retired police and fire individuals, and then lastly $2 million for capital improvements. Next slide, Alex. All right, so here. Stabilization fund. So we're going to go over a couple governing guidelines. Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 5B allows for the establishment of stabilization funds for one or more different purposes. The creation of a fund requires a 2/3 vote of the legislative body and must clearly define the purpose of that specific fund. Any change to the purpose of the fund, along with any additions to or appropriations from the fund, requires 2/3 vote of that same legislative body. Any interest shall be added to and become part of the fund. For the town of Shrewsbury, the stabilization funds reported in the general fund as unassigned fund balance consist of the general stabilization fund and the override stabilization fund. The General Stabilization Fund is the town's main reserve fund designed to provide financial stability for all aspects of town operations while improving the town's creditworthiness and flexibility. And the override stabilization fund was created to manage revenues received from any Prop 2.5 override question. The creation of this special fund provides a financial mechanism to manage the approach of the select board and school committee to the town in prolonging the durations of the funds raised from the approved override ballot question of May 2021. The override stabilization fund helps the town overcome the challenges of long-term financial stability associated with the Prop 2.5. The first two tables on this slide provide a snapshot of the contributions and withdrawals from FY22 through FY26. A couple highlights. It should be noted that the town will be at policy level for general stabilization in FY26. And for FY25, this current fiscal year is the 5th year that incorporated the Proposition 2.5 override. At this time, the recommendation is that there will be 0 of the existing override stabilization balance used to fund operating costs for FY26.
So, just a question related to free cash and stabilization. Since we are well above the 5% target for free cash of the budget, percentage of the budget, couldn't we increase the contributions to some of the stabilization funds?
We certainly could. As indicated, we are at policy level for the general stabilization, so we will still contribute to make sure that as our budget grows, the policy level will obviously grow. And we do have the opportunity to transfer funds into the override stabilization if that was, the policy that was requested, yes.
Could I? Yeah, I mean, I understand the general fund, we sort of have an idea of like a bank account, you like
Yeah.
so much, but if we had much higher than normal revenue last year and projecting it this year, it would make sense that the override fund would also increase, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we're decreasing it. So I just, like, sort of logically, if you have extra money coming in,
Yep.
that would be a fund that you could increase instead of decrease.
I think we currently are, FY26 marks a contribution to the override stabilization.
Well, it's 767,000, right? But before that was 1.6 million?
Correct, there's
And then 1.4 million, 3.2 million,
Okay.
3.2
a
million.
decrease in contributions, not, okay, yes, what you're saying.
Right, so the contributions are decreasing while our revenue is increasing.
Mhm.
And there might be a financial reason for that. We have extra, expenses, but if there's not, it would seem, I understand we'd lock it up if we put it in there. We talked about having that free cash in case there's an emergency, but if our general stabilization fund has hit the mark, it would seem logical to throw money into that. But I'm asking.
No, and you may recall from special town meeting that we did also increase the contribution to the override stabilization. So as the year progresses and we get a better understanding of the revenues, we have that opportunity. Do you want to add to that?
I think FY25 was technically 2 deposits.
Yeah.
2 contributions.
Right, and I get that. I'm just saying, it does seem to me, I understand we don't want to lock the money down because it's harder to use, but if it looked like from 2000 to 2004, we have 50% more income coming in, but we're decreasing it to this fund. I'm just saying as a logic, but I don't understand if there's a reason for that, if you don't want to put money in for that for some reason.
So, no, I don't think it's that we don't want to put money into it. So when you say when you say doubled revenue from 2004.
I'm sorry, 50% more, so from 12 to 18,
12 to
From local
18.
receipts.
from local receipts.
Yeah, I mean, local receipts is only about 15 to 18% of our total revenues. So it's only a small part of our revenue. So as we get further away from the last override, and as expenditures are greater than, on average, than our main source of revenue, which is taxation, right, the property tax, we are going to have less and less money available to put into the override stabilization. So we've been very fortunate that local receipts have, increased beyond any recent trend line, but they alone are not really enough for us to continue at much higher levels. I wouldn't, so going back to what was just said though, so if we have excess new growth over what we're budgeting right now at this part for fiscal year 26, if we get to next fall and we raise more than we're budgeting right now, that would all go into override stabilization, and that is a big driver behind how much we put in the FY25 budget, because new growth was so much higher than we estimated at the beginning of the budget process.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question? Could you remind me how many years originally we thought that the override stabilization was going to last us?
Four original years, with FY25 being the fourth year.
Okay, so now our current projection is how long?
2029.
Okay.
So 4 additional years of balanced budgets.
I mean, just to me, that's pretty impressive, right? That from the financial management from that you guys have done, the growth and the things like that, it's very impressive that we've been able to stretch out the override as long as we have, right? Whenever we need to do the override again, so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now we reduce levy? Yes, all right, excellent. Revenues comprised in this category include free cash and Selco revenue to further reduce the tax rate. Roughly 67.5% of the revenue within this category is generated through voluntary pilot contributions from Selco. These contributions are dependent on a strong financial position of Selco at the end of each of their calendar or fiscal years. It's important, this is a testament of the value of municipal utilities and Selco's shared commitment to our community. Revenues for FY26 will be held level with FY25, but are also dependent on collaboration with Selco. Pilot payments are subject to the ability for Selco to make these payments, as well as negotiations between the town and Selco, and they often consist of property value times tax rate, and then any additional supplemental funds after that. The projection for FY26 funds to reduce the tax levy is estimated at $1,536,090, as broken out on this slide.
So, question.
Dennis,
So
please.
basically, we're taking $1.5 million that we could have spent somewhere else or put into an override fund or whatever, we're giving it back to the taxpayer.
Correct.
Reducing the levy.
Yes.
So,
And historically, the town has always used a portion of free cash to do that, and then these other funds from Selco.
So the alternative would be not to do that and put more money into these funds to help stabilization further down.
These funds could be incorporated in other ways, correct, yes.
But it could go into a stabilization fund if we weren't lowering the levy,
Correct.
which would extend the time before another override came in. I'm not saying to do that, I'm just saying there's,
Yeah,
we've made a conscious decision, or the town has made a
Yep.
conscious decision to not go to full levy. And
No, we are going to full levy,
Yeah.
but we're essentially using this $1.5 million, most of it coming from Selco, to fund things that we'd otherwise have to raise the levy even higher,
yes.
or the tax rate even higher to be able to do.
All right, so the last category is other available funds, and revenues in this category include a variety of sources, including funds transferred from the sale of cemetery lots account, debt service payments from Selco, departmental account transfers, funding for the Cable Public Access Fund, which we reviewed earlier, and funding for Community Preservation Act projects. There are a couple categories within this group that at this phase in the budget development we have not forecasted. However, in order to be more accurate, we have started to include them in the FY26 revenue manual, and these categories are account transfers and funding for CPC projects. So we took a look at some averages for the past few years, and that's how we got the 866,795 for account transfers and the 1 million for community preservation. That's the estimated amount that would be available for projects in FY26. So further updates to these revenue categories will be provided throughout the development of the budget.
Gene?
Question on the sale of cemetery lots. You're kind of smoothing that along. What is the total in that budget?
Let me see if I can get that.
You don't have to do it now, you can go back.
I'll get that for you.
I have
Alright.
one-
Dennis?
I'm just, as we're talking about the cemetery lots, when are we expecting to start construction up at Prospect Park?
I've signed a contract, so it should be within the next, once weather's permitting, once they can get started.
Okay, so probably early spring.
Yeah.
Rajesh?
One quick question regarding CPC. So are we expecting a less amount than previous years, funds from the state?
So the CPC funds entered here represent two separate buckets. There's the funds that we will appropriate from the tax levy through the CPC charge, and then there is also the existing funds from their designated reserve buckets for projects. There is a calculation on the amount that we do receive from the state, and we use an average here. Whatever is represented is sort of an in and out, but we felt that the revenue manual wasn't really reflective of all the revenues, because if we didn't include CPC and some of these account transfers, each year we brought this manual forward, we would be presenting a budget that was 3 million or so less, which is never really the case. So it's really meant to just make it more comparable to year.
So just to add on to what Dave said, this should not be construed as the revenue that we'll receive in total through the Community Preservation Act. It's what we intend to expend on projects.
Okay.
So we would anticipate that we would receive the same or a little bit greater than the previous year. So a little over $1.3 million in total new revenue, but this is what we'd be appropriating specifically to put towards projects.
The current balance of the sale of cemetery lots account is $71,000.
Can I ask a quick question? So on the same note, what's the balance on CPC at this point?
So let me see. We funded a few projects at the fall special town
Yeah,
meeting.
there might be something on the master balance sheet. I think there's like a old.
We can check it offline.
Okay.
Yeah,
Milind?
won't have like the current interest on it, but.
To follow up to Rajesh's question, right, I think in initial years, we had done like a town-wide review using, of the parks, using CPC fund, if I'm not mistaken. So do we know like how many projects that we have kind of now envisioning to begin doing that?
Yeah, We do, and there was consideration for funding one major project at Arrowwood Park at the fall town meeting, but we couldn't come to consensus on the right approach for the project. But we do have a full plan that we can provide to the committee, so it is laid out. It's rather expensive, but yeah, that analysis has been done, and that's kind of the work plan or strategy that we're working through.
Yeah, if you can provide
Sure,
that.
absolutely.
Thanks.
I think we had approximately about $2 million at the,
2.3,
yeah, thank you.
and that's after funding the projects at the fall special town.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up. Please correct me if my memory's wrong, but I thought there was some actual improvements that were also going to be made to maybe some of the parks with the ARPA funds. Did that not end up happening, or it's just
Yeah.
delayed, or?
No, I mean, they have happened. I don't know if you can pull up the ARPA, but, yeah, we've made investments in, the irrigation system at Lake Street Park, lighting of the pickleball courts at Coolidge School, improvements at Dean Park, including basketball courts and playground.
Yeah.
The foundation, right? Didn't we do
There's a.
parking lot?
Oh, yeah, Foundation Field.
Yep. I believe it was design costs for a playground at Lake Street Park.
Okay.
Some improvements at Maple Ave Field.
Gene?
You just recently received a grant too for the Edgemere,
Yes.
but you already had some dollars before involved in the design of that aspect.
Yeah.
And there was one notation in there that said there were gonna be additional parking areas.
So that's an ADA grant that we received for accessibility, $58,000. So that would be the installation of 80 accessible parking spaces.
I can't believe where there's any parking spaces that you can cut into the ball field. There's some excess land adjacent to it.
I don't know the specific location, but I had another request for the scope of work on that, so I'm happy to provide it to the committee as well.
Does that complete the presentation on the revenue manual?
Yes,
I
it
don't-
does.
Are
Yes.
there any other follow-up questions in general for the revenue manual? If not, we can proceed.
I have,
Oh, you did,
a
Milind,
couple
sorry.
of comments, yeah, thanks. I think for state aid, I know it's mentioned that, for, as part of chapter 90, the Fair Share Act, the contribution is included. Is there a way to kind of separate that out, just to see
Yeah.
how much
absolutely.
state is kind of
Yep.
providing?
Yeah, chapter 90 is usually about $900,000, so fair share's
Oh, 500.
500.
Okay, and then, just to follow up, like, because it's like the Fair Share Act, it itself embeds like 50% should be spent on transportation and education. Do we have to report anything back, like how we are using it to state?
No, because they're only providing it to us through Chapter 90, which means we can only expend the funds that they give us on transportation. So it's kind of locked down
I
as we receive it.
And those are reimbursable funds, so they're expended and then submitted, and then we receive the
Okay.
funds afterwards.
So at state level, even though it's like 50-50, it's kind of, for us, it's locked down because of.
Correct. Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah, so the 50/50 is how the governor or the legislature decides to appropriate those funds. Mhm.
Thank you for
Sure.
that clarification.
So then how does that work from an accounting perspective if it's reimbursable? Do we have to expend it from free cash or something and then get the reimbursement?
I mean, if we don't have everything filed in time, it can negatively impact free cash. There is filing timelines that the Highway Department and DPW needs to follow to ensure that we are submitting all the paperwork on a regular timeframe.
Yeah,
But it comes from the operating funds, and then it's reimbursed within the same fiscal year.
Any other questions with respect to the revenue manual? If not, we can move to the quarterly update on fiscal year 2025.
Excellent. All right, as Alex is pulling this up, this will be a quick snapshot of something we're hoping to do with both the Finance Committee and Select Board in fiscal years going forward. So what we have here is the second quarter financial report of the general fund revenue and expenditures and the utilities for FY '25. So this would be a snapshot again of the financials as at the end of the calendar year 2024. Okay, first slide here, we're going to be looking at the general fund revenue. FY '25 second quarter financial report. This report is extracted from quarterly data provided through the town's enterprise resource planning system, or ERP, or MUNIS. These figures are unaudited at this point in time, but it's still valuable to understand them and see where we are as we progress. So what we can see, FY '25 annual town meeting, we anticipated 111 million in taxes. So far to date, through the end of the calendar year, we've collected about 48% of that, or 54 million. For state aid, we budgeted 24.9 million. We've collected a little over 50%. In local receipts, at the special town meeting, our budget was increased to 15.5 million, and we've collected just slightly under 50% at that point in time. Most of these figures are in line with what we've seen in previous years. Funding doesn't always come equally throughout the year. Local receipts, we see a massive increase with the commitment one. Thank you, commitment one. And also investment income comes at a slightly different schedule, so that usually adjusts the local receipts in different bursts.
Quick question.
Yes, please.
Sorry, thanks for that. I was
Yeah.
about to ask, like, does it align with the previous trends? Do we see any risks in any of these categories?
Not at this time. I do not see any significant risks. I think we'll have a much more clear shot at the end of the third quarter review, because that will be more telling of revenue received to date.
I would also just add that the fact that we've collected nearly 50% of local receipts halfway through the year is really strong. Because as Dave said, commitment one for motor vehicle excise, $7 million, or whatever we've budgeted for, $7 million by itself will all come in between roughly, $6 million of that will all come in the months of March and April. So I would say local receipts is ahead of the curve for the year again. Yep.
Thank you.
Just quick comment. I think it will be good to have a number like how far we were at the same time last year.
Yep.
To tell the story,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
We can provide that on local receipts if you're interested, or we can just
Yes.
keep going.
Okay, so now if we move on to the next one, Alex. So, general fund expenses, again, a quick snapshot. This figure here for the annual town meeting is less the expenses for education. It does include carry forwards from the previous fiscal year. And I also want to let everyone know that the retirement OPEB are paid up front on July 1st. So there are some payments that we make large amounts in at different times of the years, and our OPEB and retirement payments are typically one of those. So if we looked at quarter one, it would be more shocking. But now at quarter two, we've expended about 49% of the annual town meeting budget.
So before I get too far along, Alex just calculated, we're about $700,000 ahead of where we were last year on local receipts, so more than 10%.
Nice.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. All right. So we're going to move on to the enterprise funds, solid waste, water, sewer, and stormwater. We'll be able to look at both their revenues and expenses at the same time. And we'll start with solid waste. Solid waste, budgeted appropriated revenues for the solid waste enterprise were 3.3 million. Of that, 1.7 was a general fund subsidy through the tax levy. 200,000 was from retained earnings, and then we anticipated on collecting 1.355 million from fees associated with the program. By the end of the calendar year, we've collected just about almost 48% of that, and expenses for the solid waste program at the end of the calendar year are about 43%. And the retained earnings balance as the beginning of the fiscal year was 237,000. And Again, as we went through the revenue manual, we'll be intending on using some of those retained earnings to help support the solid waste program in FY '26. Next slide would be, all right, water. Water revenues. Initial appropriation was $6.1 million. We've collected over 52% of the revenue for the year between fees and other revenues. Other revenues may be permits associated to water and sewer. And expenses are about 29%. This is not out of the ordinary here. Sometimes project costs are seasonal, and we may have started a project, but it hasn't come to a point where we're making the payments, or we may have lined up a project to begin in the early spring, and that's when we'll start seeing more payments. So this is fairly typical of both the water, sewer, and stormwater.
So David, just back on solid waste, is there a typo? Because we say percentage collected is 47.74%, but the to-date dollar amount is just 646,000.
No.
How does the math get?
Yeah, I can further clarify. So the general fund subsidy, we could say 100% of that's been collected right now.
I see.
But really, the percent collected is referring to the 1.3 million.
I see.
Yep.
I see. Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll go on to sewer now. All right, sewer. Sewer revenues were budgeted at $12.1 million. This includes $300,000 from the II inflow and infiltration fund, about $500,000 from article closeouts, and then $2 million from the sewer surplus, which is akin to the retained earnings of water, stormwater, and solid waste. So far, we've collected 65% of the revenues to date, and for expenses, it's about 18% by the end of the calendar year. We'll move to stormwater.
Ask a quick question.
Yep.
What is an article closeout?
Excellent question. You might remember at town meeting, all the items at town meeting, they're articles, correct? Now, we have like one big article would be the whole general fund budget. But for water and sewer, sometimes we have individual projects, and those are all individual articles. So if there was replace the water main at a certain part of town and that project's done and there was 200,000 left over,
Yep.
town meeting needs to close it out and then it can be reappropriated.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Stormwater. The appropriation at town meeting was $4.5 million. This was probably the largest revenue appropriation for stormwater to date. As we discussed earlier, we anticipate on collecting 1.9 in fees, and we used about 2.6 from retained earnings to help us meet our permit. We've collected about 52.5% to date, and thus far we've expended about 20% of the appropriated expenses. And that's really meant to be a really quick snapshot. Happy to take any questions. We can dig deeper into anything. This information we're also hoping we can get on the website soon so the residents can be aware of our expenses to date.
Rajesh?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very helpful. And then this is nice to look at this halfway through to understand where we are. And if it's on the website, even better, right? Kudos to the good work. One quick question, maybe naive question, is the general fund subsidy for solid waste. Is there a reason why that particular item is generally subsidized rather than other parts of the?
That was part of the design and architecture of the solid waste enterprise. It's not 100% covered by fees. As it was developed, it was designed that the tax levy would cover a portion of it. That's a town policy. That can be changed. There's a couple ways to look at that. Like, yeah, that could be freed up from the tax levy, and that could significantly benefit other budgets. But that revenue would have to come from user fees, and so.
So if this is not subsidized, that is now coming on to the users.
The bag
Pay
fees.
the bag fee.
Correct, yeah.
And then what, like, is there a time frame, sorry, is there a time frame we expect this to run out, or is it in perpetuity?
We've been trying to maintain about a 50% split. So as new contracts or there's inflation or price changes, we've noticed that, the split grows to, we might be at about like 53% right now, so there may be adjustments to bring us back down. But I'm not aware of us eliminating the subsidy at this point in time.
And you just have to go back to prior to having a pay-as-you-throw program, the town would have, the general fund would have carried the whole cost. So the pay-as-you-throw program is a cost mitigation tool. It's not an entire cost recovery tool.
Thank you.
Just
Um,
one quick question. Back to the revenue on the sewer and the water. How comes they're not the same?
That's a good question. I think about this a lot sometimes, and maybe I shouldn't, but there is some aspect of it that we do have some sewer charges that are not directly tied to water consumption. That is an aspect of it. There are less sewer connections than there are water. Sewer rates are greater than water. I would like to see the percentages be more equal, and this could be to another, lead to another series of questions that the water department and sewer department are probably looking at right now to understand, is it unaccounted for water, is it something else? I'm not sure, but
I guess the other question I think about right now, looking at those, is what's gonna happen with Westboro going through all these rebuilding of this facility and bringing it up to stuff as far as our rates and stuff are gonna go.
Yeah. Likely just to go up. I mean, that is the major portion of the sewer expenditures, over $5 million, is the operation of the Westboro treatment plant and capital costs associated with that. We know that the plant itself right now is at about 80% capacity, so we are beginning to proceed with what can we do to expand or get greater efficiencies out of the existing plant to be able to handle additional capacity when needed.
So looking to the future, that could be one big expense coming
Right.
forward, because the last time we were in the renovations, we were in the multi-million-dollar range
Absolutely. Yep.
on there.
Yeah.
'Cause
Yeah, and I
West
mean, it's only got more complicated and higher regulations or more regulations associated.
According to the little community advertiser, Westboro's already stopped all connections.
They have,
The sewer.
yeah, yes. At their 80%, they have stopped allowing future connections. We've had the extreme benefit of being able to divert flow to the upper Blackstone. Our entire flow, unlike the town of Westboro, doesn't go to the Westboro treatment plant. So we're not in that situation at this point in time. But we do need to be careful about any of those flows that do go to Westboro.
Diana?
Can I just ask a question on the stormwater? The other enterprise funds are matched with revenue and expenditures. Could you just remind me why the stormwater isn't?
in what way? Like, why the revenues are?
Less than the
Less than it.
expenditures?
So you
Yeah.
have to add across. Are you saying like, so the 4.5 versus the 5.2?
The appropriation,
Yeah.
the appropriation one.
So we've spent more than we've collected.
We plan to spend more
Yeah.
than we collect.
Yeah. That might just be.
But is there a reason why we're planning to expend more than collection?
Because it has a reserve fund.
Yeah, the retained earnings for that. That may have been a good catch on a typo, so I apologize if that's the case. Let me just.
But aren't there other revenues that add up to the appropriation? That was my understanding when I looked at it.
That's what I thought too.
I guess just my interpretation based on the other tables is
Right.
that the appropriations line item should match,
Yeah,
so.
the budgeted expense amount was an error, so thank you. I don't know how that occurred, so I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will follow up on that. I'll this is tied to a chart, so I wonder how that happened, so.
Maybe a good addition to that would also be the balance in that account.
Yep.
Sure.
The retained earnings, as of the beginning of the fiscal year was 1.5 million, for the stormwater account there, if that's helpful for Eugene.
That's the total balance that's left in the account?
Correct.
As of June 30th, I believe.
As of June
on the-
30th.
the slide.
Following the appropriation of 2.6 of it for this current fiscal year. And that's why there's also less of an appropriation for FY '26. Now, why is that like that?
Are there any other questions related to the update? Not, thank you. We should move on to the next item, which is to review our meeting schedule. The upcoming meetings are February 20th, 2025. Then we enter our budget hearing cycle starting on March 20th, 2025 at 6 p.m., followed by our second hearing, which will be on March 22nd, a Saturday, starting at 8 a.m. in the morning. So our Thursday, March 20th meeting, we start a little bit early at 6 o'clock. I request that we schedule it for about till 9 because we tend to go over. So to keep it doable, we'll try to finish by a reasonable hour. Saturday, lunch is provided, and we start at 8 in the morning, and we generally, historically, we end around 3:30ish.
Did you say you wanted to go at 6 PM on the 20th of February?
We are on,
March.
March.
No,
March.
no, that's what I
Yeah,
thought.
yeah. I was talking about the budget hearing.
Yeah.
I have a request to the town manager's office. Could we get a list of resources that could help us in the budget hearing, like input of perhaps meetings that we should attend or listen into, or some that have already happened, and any other resources that we could study prior
Absolutely.
to, that would be really great.
There haven't been any meetings, public meetings yet, but we will make sure that the committee is aware when we're presenting to the select board and all those things.
Okay, that would be
Yes.
wonderful. Dennis?
And are we gonna get, how much before the March 20th meeting will we get the materials to review?
So the budget will be produced in February.
Yeah, so fiscal projection 1 will be published on February 14th. We'll provide a very broad overview at the February 20th meeting, and we are, I believe, town staff will be expected to submit their presentations to us by around the first week of March. So once we get that all compiled, we can aim for at least 2 weeks out.
Okay, that'd be good.
So we're talking about the budget manual, the books, the printouts. Yeah.
The books will be printed in February. The presentations for the budget hearings will be
Okay,
in March.
so by the February 20th, by the next meeting, we should have the books available.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yep.
wonderful. Any other comments or questions related to the schedule?
Just with the presentations, I know last year you had asked us if there were certain things we were looking for guidance, and so I know we ask lots of questions, which can drag things out. But if there's any learnings or improvements or any other guidance we should discuss to give town staff and the department heads, perhaps we should do so at the February 20th meeting. If
Yeah,
there's any further
can-
refinement.
Yeah,
from
we could
last
definitely
year's.
add that as an agenda item to review.
Yep.
The next meeting.
That's great. Any other comments on the schedule? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is other business. I'd like to just give an opportunity to the committee to give any feedback about the December workshop we had and any follow-up requests they may have. Is there anything anybody would like to bring to the attention of the committee, something we could organize later?
I just want to state, like, it was really informative session for sure, definitely it gave a lot of insights into, what are the things that go into. I think as we progress, it will be good to see, like, what variables, with the current, fiscal state that we are in, what is the flexibility, which parameters have a flexibility on our side that we can think about in upcoming fiscal years, maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line. I think that will be good to know, and we can collectively think about that.
That's great. Diana?
I think, there was some presentations in that workshop around maybe some new targets that were going to be proposed. I guess I was just going to ask if there's a status on the discussions between the select board and the school committee, if you can provide any update there.
So, whether or not the existing or new model is going to be the FY26 model has not been decided upon yet.
Okay.
So, we've developed the estimates for all three models, the minimum, the maximum, and the new. And they do have consequences, so to speak. The 2029 number that I gave you was the most favorable with the new model. And if we would go with the maximum model, which is not the proposal, then that number would change back to 2027. So we are advocating at a staff level to go with the new model. The year-over-year available funds is not that significantly different, but the compounding of that over the years is where the differences are made. So the sooner we make the change, the better it will be.
Okay, so if I can rephrase that just so I understand, is there's no official, this is what it will be, a different agreement, but the guidance to the town staff has been to try to go towards the new model that you proposed, is that right?
Our internal guidance to municipal staff has, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
David?
So I really liked having that meeting. I think it was very productive to talk to the select board and to the town staff. I do think before we get into those March meetings, people presenting the budgets have to know which model we're using, obviously, the school and everybody. I just, that's obvious, but I want to just put it out there that that has to be done. And we go from there. I mean, then we all make our decision on which way we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other comments or questions? Any other business anybody would like to bring up at this point?
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes.
may, I just wanted to let the committee know that earlier today we received word from the court on the Beal redevelopment project. And I'm pleased to report that the court found in favor of upholding the decision that the planning board made, and found that the plaintiffs did not have standing, that the town center district as drafted through our zoning bylaw was not ambiguous or vague, and that the way that the planning board applied their decision and wrote their decision was clear and appropriate. So those three key areas, upholding what we have in the bylaw from a clarity standpoint, how the bylaw is applied, and that the project itself doesn't unduly harm the neighborhood, was a good outcome for the planning board and the town, and moving forward with the redevelopment of the town center through that project.
Yeah, that's wonderful news, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything they'd like to comment upon?
Just, I guess, a question and then a comment. So would it be possible to get just, for our own knowledge, the total cost in legal fees? And I guess, I'm assuming we can't recoup any of that, correct?
The judge expressly wrote that into the decision, that there's no additional opportunities available for anything like that.
Okay. And then they do have an opportunity to appeal, correct? So we could still have some additional legal fees.
Yes.
I think my only other comment related to this is, I know as we were going through this, if I remember correctly, and please correct me if my memory's wrong, we kind of kept flat our legal line item and then came back later asking this body for increases. I think if you can maybe look forward to the upcoming projects, understanding which ones may be challenged where we need to fund legally, and maybe put forward a potentially more appropriate legal budget to be put in front of town meeting. I think I would appreciate that.
Yeah, and I agree with you when we can foresee that. Remember that the main difference on this project, why the costs were so high, is because we're the landowner. So many projects at the planning board or ZBA get appealed by abutters or anyone that has standing, but the town plays a very limited role because we have no direct interest. The developer has a greater interest in trying to preserve the decision of the planning board in most cases, or vice versa. So we incur the legal fees that we incur for this project were around $105,000, and that is an extreme anomaly because we normally don't engage in this type of defense of a decision of the planning board. We allow the developer or the other party to do so.
Okay.
That doesn't include loss of revenue, potential loss of revenue. We might factor
Not from the
that.
site, correct.
Yeah.
Do we,
Yes,
do we
please.
have an estimate on what this delay has caused in revenue? Is it?
I'm sure we could calculate one.
It would be interesting to know.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Rajesh, yeah.
So past 30-day time frame, the cooling period or challenge ability to appeal period. So do we have a estimate when the developers start to work on that project?
For the next 30 days,
Mhm.
from a legal
After
standpoint.
that, yeah, like development standpoint, like does the timeline?
Oh,
fix in?
yeah, so, I mean, I'd have to go back and look at the land disposition agreement that we have with the developer. The clock will start again.
Mhm.
I guess it started for a few days and then there was an appeal, so it stopped. I think one bright spot perhaps is that now that the decision has been made and we're in January, that hopefully the developer would want to move expeditiously to begin construction this summer. But I know there's a number of milestones and targets as to the transfer of land. But I haven't gone back to the agreement and refreshed my memory on it yet.
Thank you.
Gene,
One quick follow, what are you gonna do about the parking that's using that facility now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that parking that you see there is from Maple and Main, from across the
No,
street.
I know it.
Yeah.
But there's other people using it besides.
Yep. Yeah. It's something that the new property owner will have to manage and determine where those folks are coming from. Are they coming from the residences there in the multifamily building or where they are, and then work on a strategy for it.
I think it's a combination, but there's a lot of them on
Yeah,
certain
agreed.
days of the week.
Agreed.
You may have 25 cars there,
Right.
you know?
Elaine,
I was just going to make a comment, just extension to what Dennis said, I think it would be good to know the money spent, time and energy, and the lost revenue
Mhm.
in this litigation. I don't know how we kind of put that forward on our website or anything. I think it will be good to publish that, in my personal opinion, so that people to know, regardless of outcome, people should know that. Just
David,
Yeah, my personal opinion is they follow the legal right, we follow the legal right, move on. Like, I think if we publish that, I don't see any benefit to doing that. Does that make sense? Like, I don't see a benefit to
I
saying.
don't see any
We
harm
think-
in doing it either, though.
Well, you kind of say.
It's money the town spent, and it cost us. So people should know that they defended it, and that's what it cost.
But people were following the right.
Yeah,
do it.
it's their right to do it.
And I just don't want to get into, well, you cost us this much, and the process is done. Move on, and we get the development done.
But that money is something that cannot be spent on other things in the town. So I just think it's good to know. We defended the lawsuit. This is what it costs. And if there are other lawsuits, there will be costs to it. It's not a freebie.
I just
And I think
disagree with all that.
Diana
Okay,
has
you and I
a
disagree.
Correct, that's all.
That's
Dan has a comment.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. Are you done?
No, I was just gonna say, I think there are pros and cons, and so I think, you've heard our opinions and make what you feel is the appropriate decision, so.
That's correct. I mean, I tend to align a little bit with David that bygones be bygones. We just move forward. We're one town.
I think as a finance committee, we should know what was spent on that, though.
I think we
Yeah,
should,
we have-
we
we
as the
should have that.
finance committee
I
should
didn't
know,
say about
but-
publishing it, but we
Yeah.
should know what it costs.
Yes,
Well, I'm sorry,
that's true.
I'm talking about publishing it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
putting it on the website is just, probably not important, but we should know what it costs.
Yeah, if we could get that information, that would be
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
Wanted to provide one clarification on the stormwater as well. It looks like I had accidentally grabbed a previous year's warrant article and added it to as well, so that the slide has been updated and the total expenses to date are 22% as opposed to the 18 earlier, so thank you for catching that.
Okay, if there's no other business, you had something, Rajesh?
No.
No, okay. We can move on to item number 6, which is the correspondence we have received. So, we received 3 emails on November 12th, 15th, and 18th from Taylor Galusha, our communications coordinator. Then we received an email from our state rep, Hannah Kane, regarding the economic development bond bill. That was on November 20th. Then we received, once again, emails from Taylor on November 25th, December 9th, December 16th, December 23rd, January 6th, and January 13th. They were all related to the Stay Connected Shrewsbury newsletter she sends out. Are there any comments or questions on the correspondence that we received? Not, may I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
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 All against, please say nay. The motion passes. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.